All right, this is the podcast for environmental science. It's called Climate Change. Your outline should be available on Google Classroom. You can either print that off and fill out the outline, or you can take notes on all the slides onto a piece of paper. When you are done, you can upload your pictures of your notes to Google Classroom. First thing you need to understand is that weather and climate are not the same thing. This was discussed in the web quest that we did before the quarantine, and I mentioned it in the last podcast. So first, let's describe weather. Weather is short term. It is typically a daily thing. I can predict weather for Tuesday. I can predict weather for Wednesday, etc. It is in a limited area. I can predict the weather for Ortonville. It is in a limited area, and it can change rapidly due to some factors. Meteorologists try, but it is very difficult to predict. And if you look outside your window right now, that is called weather. In contrast, climate. Climate is long term. It's measured over long amounts of time. It is in a wider area. It's not so specific to location. It involves seasonal changes. It looks at averages of many years of data of these weather observations. And climate can be affected overall by different factors. It can be affected by abiotic factors, which are non-living things, and climate can be affected by biotic factors, which are living things. So on your list for abiotic factors that affect climate, number 1 is going to be latitude. Make sure you know what each of these are. Latitude are the lines on the globe. So location makes a difference for the climate of that area. A second abiotic factor that affects climate is altitude. Altitude is how high it is above the sea level or the earth land. Third abiotic factor that affects climate is the ocean currents, and we will be doing an exercise on this next week, but you can see the different rotations of the currents of the ocean in the different locations. Fourth abiotic factor that affects climate is topography. That is the height of the landforms. Fifth abiotic factor that affects climate is solar radiation. We talked about this in our last podcast. Solar radiation comes from the sun. It can be absorbed, which most of it is, by the Earth's surface and warms it, or it can be reflected back. Sixth abiotic factor that affects climate is evaporation. So the ocean evaporates into water vapor. Seventh abiotic factor that affects climate is orbital variations. So the way the Earth and the Sun are oriented, that can affect climate. And the eighth and last abiotic factor that can affect climate is volcanic activity. Now looking at biotic or living factors that affect climate, the first one is transpiration. Transpiration is water being released from a leaf. Second biotic factor that affects climate is respiration. You got carbon dioxide coming out and oxygen coming in. Those gases can affect climate. Third biotic factor that affects climate is photosynthesis. You got carbon dioxide going in, oxygen coming out for plants. The fourth biotic factor that affects climate is decomposition. There's a lot of minerals that get into the soil. And the fifth and final biotic factor that affects climate is digestion. With digestion, you're going to have hydrogen, carbon dioxide, and methane coming out into the atmosphere. All right, so when we're looking at our climate, there are greenhouse gases that are essential to our climate. And so I put, again, the diagram from last podcast of the greenhouse effect. But let's get into what greenhouse gases are and what they can do to different planets, and then we'll go into the different kinds of greenhouse gases. So first of all, if there's planets like Pluto that don't have barely any greenhouse effect happening, not a lot of greenhouse gases, they are very, very cold. Pluto's average temperature is negative 370 degrees Fahrenheit. Or it could be the extreme. If they don't have a lot of greenhouse effect, they can have huge temperature swings from day to night. For example, on Mars, there's a 300-degree difference between their high temperature and their low temperature. Planets that have too much greenhouse gases are super hot. The average temperature on Venus, which has a lot of greenhouse gases, is 855 degrees Fahrenheit. And then you have Earth, which is just right for right now anyway. So, the natural greenhouse gases that occur on Earth there's 4 of them. So number 1, you're going to write water vapor. Number 2, carbon dioxide. Number 3, methane. And number 4, nitrous oxide. And we're going to get into each of those in a little bit. With no greenhouse gases at all in its atmosphere, scientists estimate that the Earth's average temperature would be about -18 Celsius or about 0 Fahrenheit. So the problem, though, is that the greenhouse gases, the content of them in the atmosphere, is being altered by humans. And the result of this change is called global warming. And we have 5 pieces of evidence that this is occurring on Earth. First evidence. Glaciers are melting. And unfortunately, I have the other picture covered up, but the glacier that's in Montana in 1913 looked pretty nice. You can see on the left, and I wish I could show you, but in 2005, a lot of that white area has disappeared. Also, another glacier in Austria in 1875. You can see it's really nice. You can see the white formations of the glaciers, and in 2004, a lot of that white has receded. Evidence number 2 is from ice cores. Ice cores, you can get them from Antarctica, and they yield information about the samples of Earth's past atmosphere. And you can look at the amount of carbon dioxide that are in these ice cores versus temperature. And so you can see that as temperature goes up in blue on the graph, the carbon dioxide concentration of the ice cores is also higher. Third part of evidence is from tree ring data. As temperatures are going up, trees are getting wider. The width of the tree ring is getting wider. You can see that in the graph. Evidence number 4 is that animal and plant life are changing. I have a couple of them covered up on accident, but for the one example would be on animals. 2/3 of the European butterfly species studied have shifted their ranges north, so they don't live in the same area anymore because it's cold there. The temperatures are changing, so they move north about 150 miles. And evidence number 5 is that climate change seems to be accelerating. It says each of the 48 states experienced above normal annual temperatures in 2006. For the majority of states, 2006 ranked among the 10 hottest years since 1895. So the more greenhouse gases there are, means we have a warmer Earth. And you can see the different sectors and different things that are causing these greenhouse gases to be emitted. All right, so first let's look at carbon dioxide. You can see on the graph that carbon dioxide has been going super high after the year 2000. For your bullets, in the distant path, the Earth was much warmer. High levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere fueled lush growth, some of which was stored in the form of fossil fuels. Carbon dioxide in Earth's atmosphere has risen by about 30% since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. You know, think of all the factories that are emitting all those carbon dioxide vapors into the air. Most of the increase is due to the combustion of fossil fuels, which releases the long-stored carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Second greenhouse gas, methane. Looking at the graph again, you can see that methane levels have increased a lot since the year about 2000. Methane is released by coal mining, it's released by landfills, it's released by agricultural, particularly through digestive processes of beef and milk cows. And the last greenhouse gas is nitrous oxide. Again, the graph looks very similar. Nitrous oxide concentrations have increased a lot in the graph over time. Nitrous oxide is produced by cars, it's produced by fossil fuels, and it's used for heat and electricity and by agriculture. So, what can be done? First, we have to admit that climate change is everyone's problem. It's not just one person's problem. No agency, no government, no scientist can fix it. We're all in this together. We got here because of our lifestyle, so our lifestyle has to change. And so these are things that you can do. First off, looking at heating and cooling. In your house, you can install programmable thermostats. You can check and repair weather stripping on doors and windows. You can adjust your clothing instead of the thermostat. You can keep your furnace clean and your air conditioning filters clean. You can consider closing off unused rooms. You can install insulated drapes. And you can plant deciduous trees on the sunny side of your house. In the area of water and conserving hot water, you want to take shorter showers. You want to install low flow shower heads. Install a blanket on your hot water heater. Insulate hot water pipes. Wash laundry in cold water instead of hot water. Only run the dishwasher if it's full. Fix any leaky faucets. In the car, plan ahead. Do several errands in one single trip. Walk, bike, clean out your car. Lighter cars get better mileage. Make sure your engine is properly tuned. Keep your tires inflated. Carpool, ride the bus. Support public transportation. Consider a smaller car or a hybrid. In terms of electricity, unplug chargers for cell phones or other appliances when you're not using them. Get in the habit of turning off lights and appliances. Vacuum the coils on the back of the fridge. Change to compact fluorescent bulbs. Make sure your next computer is a laptop. And install timers or motion sensors on outdoor lights so they're not on all the time. And lastly, reduce waste. Recycle. Buy recycled products. Choose products that have less packaging. Reuse things, repair things, donate things. Don't buy it unless you need it. Carry cloth bags when you shop. Use a refillable travel mug or a water bottle. Give your time instead of material gifts, or donate to a charity in the recipient's name. So just remember, there's no place like home, and there may never be again. So everyone needs to do their part.